We are in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 18. Verse 18. Just to kind of catch us up a little bit, as we talked last week, David is running for his life. Saul and his men are in hot pursuit. Michal, Saul's daughter, David's wife, is just helped David escape from their house. And then verse 18, chapter 19, David has fled to Samuel, who lives in Ramah, and he's told Samuel everything that's going on. And we talked last week, remember, Samuel is this good, godly friend that David knew he could depend on. That's when we get in trouble, when we have needs, when we are needing somebody's help, that's who we go to. A lot of times that's our family, a lot of times close friend, but somebody that we can depend on. And then they're in Ramah, and they both go to a little hamlet inside of the village of Ramah. A hamlet, a kind of a neighborhood section of a bigger town called Ramah. A lot of people think that Saul had not retired. That Samuel had not retired. In fact, I had a couple of commentaries to say that he was probably overseeing a school of prophets there in the hamlet of Naioth of Ramah. We'll look at the verse here in just a minute that supports that. So that's where David and Samuel are. They're in Naioth of Ramah at this school of prophets. What better place to go worship? What better place to go pray? What better place to go seek help than a school of prophets? But Saul had spies everywhere. Saul had spies everywhere. And they reported, this is verse 19, they reported to Saul that that's where David was. And then Saul's very diligent. He sends 3 groups of soldiers to capture David. Verse 20, this is the first group. But when they got there, this first group of soldiers got there, they saw a group of prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing there as their leader, the head of this school of prophets. And the Spirit of God came on Saul's men, and they also prophesied. Wow. Prophesy has been used several different ways in 1 Samuel. The obvious one is when you foretell the future. Another one is like it's used today. They're singing and giving praise to God. And then the other one that we've looked at back in chapter 18, verse 10, was when that evil spirit came on Saul and he was prophesying. Because that evil spirit from God had came on him forcefully. But these soldiers, these people that Saul had sent to kill David, wind up prophesying. Some comments that Wiersbe made. Saul's soldiers didn't become prophets. They only uttered words inspired by the Spirit of God. Another comment, God protected David and Samuel not by sending an army, but by sending the Holy Spirit to turn warriors into worshipers. Isn't that a fantastic thought to convert these warriors that went there to kill David and then do to God in his spirit? The next thing we know, they're singing praises to God. And this happens 2 more times. Saul didn't give up. That didn't work. He sent another one. They started prophesying. He sent a third. They started singing praises to the Lord. Thought about 2 Corinthians 10 and 4. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of this world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Divine power can turn soldiers warriors into worshipers. The Spirit of God can turn warriors into worshipers. Well, these group of soldiers had failed, so Saul decides, I'm going to go myself. Verse 22. Finally, he himself left for Ramah and went to the great cistern at Seku, and he asked, where are Samuel and David? Well, they're over in Naioth at Ramah, they said. What is a cistern? Place where you catch rainwater. Rainwater. So they went to the great cistern. So you think this is probably something pretty large. It can be a man-made. It can be a natural place where it can be a natural watershed. Evidently, it was pretty big. If it was called great, it was a place where clean, safe water was kept.
My grandparents' cistern had frogs in it.
Okay, Duane. Some of them, if they stay there long enough, and if it's in a little sunlight, they might get a little green tint on top. But as a whole, the water is, I guess, if you can filter out the frogs, the water's good. And most of the time, the water is a whole lot better than well water or lake water or other sources.
I hated drinking the water from my aunt and uncle.
Sandra, I've got this picture of this big wooden barrel kind of down at off the eave of the house. You know, that's the cistern that I remember. But
Stop rocks and stone.
we've all got this little. But again, it was the place where you went and got your drinking water because it was protected. Hopefully, it was not contaminated. And Seku was just a place in Palestine at or near Ramah, and it was where this great cistern is at. So verse 23. So Saul went to Naioth at Ramah, but the Spirit of God came even on him, and he walked along prophesying until he got to Naioth. Again, the Spirit of God came on Saul, and he started singing praises to God. Again, the Spirit of God had turned Saul, the warrior, into a worshiper. Verse 24, Saul stripped off his garments and laid naked all that day and all that night. My commentary said that he just stripped off his outer garments, including any armor that he might have had on. He wasn't literally laying there naked. To the point that the people were even saying, what is going on with Saul? What has come over? He's laying there with no armor on, no outer garments, and he's praising God. They're sitting there saying, what is going on with Saul? During the meantime, David slips away to meet Jonathan. Chapter 19. What did we learn? How do we apply it? Your thoughts. Remember, we kind of ended up chapter 19 pretty quick this morning. So you remember about the idols and how easy it was for this monster that we've got in our homes called a TV. And it's not wrong to watch TV. But what we talked last week, it's wrong to worship. And by worship, that takes you away from things you should be doing for the Lord. That's taking you away from something that you know that you've been called to do for the Lord. Remember anything else? What about something that we've talked about this morning?
Saul didn't give up. Saul would not give up.
Saul did. In fact, remember, the Spirit came on David, and God's Spirit left Saul. So he was bound and determined to kill, to do away with David. God's divine power can do amazing things in our lives. And we've all seen amazing things happen, not only in our lives, but to things that have gone on. And we asked, how could that happen? Wow, I can't imagine how that would happen. God's divine power can turn warriors into worshipers. Wow, amazing thoughts. Chapter 20. verse 1 of chapter 20. Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan. So why? The first question I ask is, why would David leave Ramah, his friend Samuel, the prophet, the school of prophets? Why would he flee? Of course, we know Saul was there, but why would he flee and go to Jonathan that's at Gath? We think he's at Gath.
Asking questions. Everything.
What's that, Sandra?
I said evidently he wanted to ask some questions.
Yeah, he needed to his very, very, very good friend. He needed to kind of bounce some things, you know, and you know, we know Saul is still at Naioth at Ramah, but David had been wondering, is Saul's condition going to last? Is this just a temporary condition that he thinks, Pat? Thank you. That he's in. You know, Saul had promised Jonathan that he would not, that he would not kill David back in this chapter 19, verse 6. Of course, we know that he broke that promise 4 times in verses 20 through 24. So was David impulsive? Did he just say, "Oh wow, I need to get out of here"? Did David, and the question that we asked, did he fear Saul more than he trusted Samuel and God? Fear. In the definition for fled is run away from a place or situation of danger. So fearing for your life, can fear and danger cause us to do things that we would not ordinarily do? So I'll open that up. Can fear, that danger, can it cause us to do? Can it drive us to do things that we wouldn't ordinarily do? I don't think I've ever feared for my life. So that's kind of hard for me to relate to. But if you've ever feared for your life, it will make you do some things that you probably would not ordinarily do. And I think that's where David was. He feared for his life. And he said, I got to get out of there. No doubt needed to talk to Jonathan. No doubt went to his very, very, very good friend. David was not infallible. David was not infallible. Do we think that David was still a man after God's own heart? Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think the Lord was still with David? Absolutely. Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And Paul's talking to us. He's talking to faithful believers. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And then the follow-up to that, they are justified freely. We are justified freely by God's grace. Well, Jonathan was in a tough situation. We know he probably, that you can't say that. We know he wanted to be loyal to his father, the king, but at the same time, he valued his relationship with David, the next king of Israel. Can family relationships like the one that we've seen with Jonathan and Saul, can they get a little messy sometimes? Can they get a little messy? Sometimes kind of even get our priorities out of whack. Kind of hold the finger there and turn to Matthew 10:34 through 37. Jesus clearly gives us some instructions on priorities in our life. Matthew 10:34 through 37. Of course, Jesus is talking to his disciples, talks to us today. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone, verse 37, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Wiersbe's comment: Jesus Christ calls for supreme devotion to him and his will for our lives. I love what it was said down in my footnotes. Love of family is a law of God. We are called to love, take care of, and be responsible for our families. But even this love can be self-serving and used as an excuse not to serve God or do his work. We can even use our families sometimes as an excuse not to serve God or do his work. And that's where the conflict is for us, because we know what we should be doing. Well, Jonathan, no doubt, had been dealing with this same conflict, maybe a conflict of family loyalties. So was he most loyal to his father, Saul, or to his closest friend, David? So he's got this struggle. Jonathan's got this struggle going on. He loves his father. He's the king. But yet he knows that David's going to be the next king, and they've got this very, very, very strong bond. Chapter 20, verse 1. David asked Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is trying to kill me?" Pretty obvious, Saul is very determined to kill David. And David must have known that Saul feared losing his kingdom. He had been around Saul long enough. He could see the jealousy and the envy. Feared losing his throne. Fear that turned to anger. Remember, twice in two different settings, Saul wanted to pin David to the wall with his spear. David must have known that Saul was envious. But what David did not know is this envy could get so bad that it could, remember what we talked about from Proverbs 14:30? Envy rots the bones. And that's where Saul was at this time. Envy had rotted his bones. I love Sharon's word. He was paranoid. He was envious. He was angry, and other powerful emotions. It put murdering David.
And he was probably a little jealous of David because David had so much more than Saul could ever have in terms of character, in terms of background, in terms of his worshiping God. It had to involve jealousy as well. He obviously made a better king than Saul ever was. Saw the handwriting.
Oh, Jim, I don't think there's any more powerful emotion than jealousy. You could put it right there with envy and anger and I think Saul was plagued by every emotion in the world, and all of those turned to murder.
We had to do a psychiatric
Yeah, Jim, that might have been a little scary, wouldn't it, where Saul was at that time? Well, David didn't want to openly criticize King Saul too much to Jonathan. But this was a matter of life or death. Skipping ahead to verse 3, there's only a step between me and death. That's where David was. Because of what Saul was very intently set to do, there's only a step between me and death. But I'm going to back up and look at verse 2. Because Jonathan's reply was never, you are not going to die. Look, my Father doesn't do anything great or small without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so. Was Jonathan being just a little bit naive? Or was Jonathan being loyal to his father? Was he having a struggle, a conflict with these family loyalties?
Maybe he just couldn't believe that his daddy could kill somebody.
Sandra, I think naive. We're going to talk about denial here in a minute. I think Jonathan was struggling, knowing where his father was at that time, especially as it had to do with David, his good friend. And Jonathan even thought his relationship with his father was closer than what it really was, because we're going to see kind of toward the end of this chapter that Saul actually tries to kill his son Jonathan. And there Jonathan is saying, hey, we've got a good relationship. And in the same chapter, very same chapter, he even tries to kill his own son. Verse 3, David took an oath. The way we would say that today is we'd come up to somebody and we'd say, I promise you, your father knows how devoted we are to each other. In verse 3, and I know your father does not want to grieve you. Yet, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, there is only a step between me and death. So Jonathan agrees to help any way he can, and kind of comes at him with a very simple plan. David, you're going to hide, and Jonathan's going to shoot some arrows. We'll talk a little bit more about this plan here in a little bit, because Jonathan knows knows about Saul's spies, and so he's thinking something as every day as just going out in the pasture and target shooting with your bow and arrow probably wouldn't arouse the spies' attention, probably wouldn't arouse Saul's attention. Let's talk about this new moon festival just a little bit. It's talked about in Numbers 10 and Numbers 28. Saul was expecting David to attend this new moon festival. It was customary. This was customary for each Jewish family to hold a feast at the new moon. Saul would expect David to attend. If Saul's son-in-law, this popular military leader didn't attend, it would insult the king. But I had to just kind of step back for a minute and say, okay, now wait a minute. King Saul is very obviously trying to kill David, but yet he's going to be insulted if David doesn't attend his festival.
He may be disappointed too.
Yes.
That may be the opportunity to take care of his problem.
And Jim, that's kind of the only rationale that I could draw, that maybe he was seeing that as another opportunity to be in front of David and hurl that spear again. Yeah, maybe get home this time. But it seems like that psych evaluation on Saul, Jim, he just continues to do some things that just kind of blows me away. Well, Jonathan would tell Saul that David's not there. He's not going to be there because he went to Bethlehem to observe this new moon festival with his family. Verse 7, if this made Saul angry, if Saul loses his temper, you can know that your father is set on killing him. That meant that David would be correct of his evaluation of Saul. If he excused David, verse 7, and just said, very well, maybe Saul was not so upset, and Jonathan would have been correct. Verse 8, David then reminds Jonathan of this brotherhood covenant that they had made back in chapter 18, verse 3, where they were sworn brothers for life. Verse 8, David says, if I'm guilty of anything, then kill me yourself. Don't hand me off to your father. And of course, Jonathan again says, never. If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you? So Sandra, denial, naive, denial, whatever. I think that David, that Jonathan has just got to be struggling with what his father's trying to do, with his father's personality, with his father's demeanor. Well, because in verse 19, or chapter 19, verse 1, Saul had told Jonathan to go kill David. So I'm not for sure where Jonathan is at right now. Verse 10, David asked, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? And Jonathan said, I'll be the one to tell you what he says. If Saul's reaction is friendly or hostile about you not being there at his new moon festival. So they go out into the field to talk. Why did they go out in the field?
He's going to explain to him what he wants him to do.
And Sandra, they needed to be in private because remember, his spies are everywhere. They needed to go somewhere where they could talk and be in private and have a good conversation. Verse 12, I want to see what your versions say. It says, I will sound out to my father. What do your versions say? Sound out to my father. I had to look into that a little bit.
Swear by the Lord.
Swear, yeah, Krista, that makes more sense. Swear to the Lord. Oh, what do some of your versions say?
One thing it says is that I will surely sound out. So it's even not just doing it, but surely I will do it.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to reassure David that I'm going to tell you exactly what my father, not only exactly what he says, but kind of what his demeanor was. Because if you look on into verse 12, is he favorably disposed? Verse 13, or does he intend to harm you? I'll let you know either way. Verse 13, continuing on, may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. That's a pretty clear indication that Jonathan fully expects David to be the next king of Israel. Verse 14, but show me, Jonathan's talking, but show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. In the ancient world, and maybe I've watched too much TV. In the ancient world, you get a new ruler. He comes in and takes over a kingdom. What does he do to the old ruler? What does he do to the old ruler and any heirs that would be out there? I think both. He put them in the dungeon, put them far, far away, or even out and out murder sometimes. But he wants to get them, make sure that they're out of the way. I think that's the thought behind, got to be what Jonathan's thinking, so that I may not be killed. Kind of the remainder of verse 14, 15. Jonathan even asked David to keep that promise, not only for him, but for Jonathan's children. Show this unfailing kindness. And we're going to see that years later, David made a lot of effort, great pains to fulfill this promise. 1 Samuel 23, 16 through 18. And Ed, I think you brought this up. Jonathan would become David's second in command. He would become his second in command. Then as you skip over into 2 Samuel chapter 8, he even invites Jonathan's crippled son, Mephibosheth, into his palace to live. So he's going to take care of Jonathan. He's going to take care of Jonathan's family. And of course, verse 16, Jonathan reaffirms that oath to the whole house of David. David, your enemies are my enemies. They're to be dealt with. It was an oath that, again, taken out of love for each other. Verse 17. Wiersbe reminds us, it was not God's will that David would permanently join himself to Saul and his family. Why not? Why wouldn't he be permanently joined to Saul's family? Because they're already condemned. They're already, the monarchy was already condemned and rejected due to Saul's disobedience and rebellion, all the way back in chapter 13, verse 14. Remember when he offered the sacrifice? And in chapter 15, verse 18, when he said that that kingdom was going to be torn away from you. So it was never God's intent for Saul to be joined, for David, to be joined permanently with Saul and Jonathan's family, because they had already been rejected. 1 Samuel chapter 31, verses 1 and 2, Jonathan is killed in battle. And then if you skip on over to 2 Samuel 16, verses 16 through 23, David rejects Saul's daughter Michal as his wife, and she died childless. Not a good ending to that story. That's why David was not going to be a permanent part of that family. Verse 20, Jonathan tells David, tomorrow at this new moon festival, you will be missed, your seat will be empty. Verse 19, day after tomorrow, go to the stone of Ezel and hide, and I'll shoot 3 arrows. Verse 21, I'm going to send a boy to retrieve the arrows. If they are on your side, as surely as the Lord lives, you're safe. There is no danger. If the arrows are beyond you, then you know that you're gonna need to go. You're gonna need to know that this is the Lord's will, because the Lord has sent you away. Verse 23, and about this matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness in between you and me forever. No matter what happened in between David and Jonathan, they would be brothers for life. They would be brothers forever. Verse 24, David's hiding in the field. This new moon festival begins, and it's typically a 2-day festival. Saul sits down to eat, verse 24. Notice in verse 25 where Saul is sitting. Where is he sitting? With his seat against the wall, kind of with his back against the wall. Remember, he's paranoid. In a word that we had used, he's suspicious. So he kind of wanted his back to the wall. He trusted very few people. If he trusted anybody, it would have been Abner, his cousin, the commander of his army. He was there. And then notice whose seats were across from him so he could keep an eye on him. Jonathan and David, even though David's seat was empty. Verse 26, Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. Surely that's the reason he missed the first day of my festival, because it wouldn't be unusual for a person to miss that first day due to being, for some reason or another, ceremonially unclean. They could have touched something dead. Could have had sexual relations with their wife. That would have defiled them for a day. To get clean, all they had to do was wait a day, separate themselves from other people, and then bathe, wash his clothes, change his clothes. But what happened on that second day? He should have been there. David was still missing. Verse 27. Why hasn't this son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Not David my son-in-law, not David the famous mighty warrior, but disdainfully calls him the son of Jesse. And then that's where Jonathan blatantly lies. Let's read verse 28 and 29. Chapter 20, verse 28, 29. Jonathan answered, David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. This is a lie. He said, let me go because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers. This is why he has not come to the table. Why was Saul angry?
And he was lying to him.
Yeah, I think he kind of knew, he could have missed that opportunity to, and he might have just been insulted, Sandra. He might have been, hey, he's supposed to be here, no excuses. But Saul was offended. Wiersbe makes a comment. He says, when hateful feelings are in the heart, it doesn't take much for angry words to come out of the mouth. And Saul's heart was full of these hateful feelings. David wasn't there for Saul to take his anger out on. So who did he take his anger out on? Jonathan, his son. Verse 30. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? Wiersbe's take on this is it's not so much of an attack on his wife or Jonathan's mother as he's just trying to describe just how low he thinks Jonathan is for siding with David instead of siding with him.
Talk about the mothers. He's the father of Jonathan.
Good
So
point.
he doesn't want to take any responsibility for anything going wrong with Jonathan. It's all Mama and Grandma and all the others.
Jim, it couldn't be my fault.
No.
So it's got to be my wife's fault and kind of
She gave birth to it.
yeah, kind of passing
Even
the
back then, they were saying your mama.
yeah, it's pretty obvious that he was not going to take. Nothing was going to be reflected back on King Saul. So the king is just shouting, you're no son of mine. You must be illegitimate. In fact, verse 31, it's your fault if David lives. He says, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. If you let David live, if David lives, then neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Your comments. I think we're going to cut off there for today. Your comments.
Well, already, Jonathan was not going to inherit the kingdom because Saul didn't have a kingdom to inherit. So what he is basically saying is the obvious, but making it Jonathan's fault that he's not going to be king. It's not Saul who lost the kingdom. It's his son who's the fault.
I think so. And not only is Jonathan a little naive and a bit in denial, but obviously Saul is too, because Saul knows that kingdom has been torn away from him. It's been torn away from him.
Yeah, but I don't think he's willing to accept that it's been torn away. He doesn't want to believe do anything to deny the kingdom.
And I think you're right on. I think he is just in a different place. Shirley?
I think of how God provides. It's like the people that in your life are significant. They're not just there. Because Jonathan played a big part in saving him. If Jonathan hadn't been there, God still could have saved him. But Jonathan was there. And so he was able to see things through to help David become king. I think it's important to realize the people that are in your life, because God puts them there for, you know, to secure what he wants to do. He could have done it anyway. Out my mind, God could have. But he also knew that David wasn't gonna do anything to Saul, because that was God's will.
Surely he had a part of that obvious bond that David and Jonathan had. And you know, can't we do that in our lives? Just kind of step back, and it jumps out at us in scripture all the time. Just kind of step back and say, wow, God, you were in control of this. Wow, thank you for not giving me what I asked for. Thank you for being in, because surely he's in control of this, and he's going to allow, he's going to drive this thing to, with Saul to a head.
This made David a better king. The trials, the troubles, the difficulties you go through change you. And I can't imagine being on the run all the time and looking out for your life and seeing what Saul could do to you at any moment's notice. You know, the fear you were talking about.
Yeah, I think we talked a couple of weeks ago that David was going to be in exile for 10 years, but God was going to use this 10-year period to help David grow and mature and be that next king of Israel.
God works in our lives.
Amen. Thank you for being in control. Thank you. I'm not in control.
I was there in California, rain is not doing this, right?
Yeah, I think California is going to catch up. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to finish going to finish chapter 20. Hopefully, chapter 21 next week. Going to put a bookmark in, and then week after Labor Day weekend, we'll have Jess in here with a study of Jeremiah.
Thank
y'all.
you. Thank you, man. You have a good week.
Please don't forget about. Please don't forget about Welcome Back Wednesday. The sign.